And today our topic is Agent of Change, which Ellen Miller from the Nighttime Industries Association will introduce us to. And Lucas Knoflach from Sound Diplomacy will moderate the panel discussion. So thank you guys for coming, and thanks also to Waves that it was even possible that we could do the panel here. And so yeah, enjoy the discussion, and Ellen, you start the presentation.
Thank you, Martina. Hello, everyone. I've been told I have to be very fast, so if I speak too quickly, someone throw something at me or do something like that. So my name is Alan Miller. Nice to meet you all. When I talk about these things in different cities, I like to think in Vienna, a place so important globally for culture and for music in particular. And these conversations we have about nightlife and about music and culture is really about the kind of cities we want to live in and the kind of country that we want to live in and what it means. And so I quite often use quite bold images about creating a new cultural renaissance in a climate where often there's a conversation about closing things down, stopping them, regulating, and putting in positions. So that's the backdrop, and I think that when we think about any conversation about musical venues and culture, it should be considered in how we can create a cultural renaissance, an urban renaissance. What makes a great city? Often these things are discussed, but, you know, culture, music, people coming together, being inspired, finding new ways to connect, tourism, brand values, artists, the next generation of talent and innovation and creativity. And these things tend to happen quite often in a lot of informal places. There's the big institutions, but also there's the much smaller places. And often the smaller ones, as we know, are where some of those new cultural phenomena emerge. We often find them on the dance floor and on the stage. So I'm going to talk a bit about Agent of Change, but also about how we actually work together with stakeholders and do things, and take you on a quick journey of how it happened in London and in some other cities, and then we can talk a bit about the experience here. Just to say that nothing's really in a straight line, and there's some achievements, and you move forward and you move back, and often it can be a painful journey, but the important thing is to persevere and keep going. To give a little context, and I apologise if everyone knows this, but just a while ago, 5 years ago in London and in the UK, we felt like we were all being closed down. That like bars and clubs and venues were consistently being attacked by local councils and police around all sorts of issues around regulation, of which noise was one of the issues, noise complaints. Last night I was eating at a very charming place called Erich. It was lovely, but at 2 minutes to 11, Monica, the lovely person who was working there, apologized but said, could we hurry up and finish, because otherwise they would get in trouble with the police. And it was a real shame, because it's a beautiful place and you kind of know that the noise regulations take a big toll. Well, in London we had a similar thing, and we worked very hard to get a number of things happening. One of them was to create a nighttime commission. One of them was to create a nighttime ambassador, a night czar. And also to have a committee around music. And one of the key things within that was the discussion around Agent of Change. And it must be said that there was another organisation called the Music Venues Trust. Some of you might know. They played a very seminal role in all of this. And we also championed Agent of Change among a number of other things. But we made the point that Agent of Change, which I'll go on to talk about, in and of itself is one thing out of many, and really you need to kind of address all of the things that impact a city. So we knew that it was really important to bring stakeholders involved. We knew that we have to get the mayor, but also the police, housing, transport, universities, and local councillors all around the table, all talking about their concerns, all talking about things they didn't agree with, get it all out on the table. If you think nightlife is all about drugs and crime, let's talk about it. If you think that the problem is that, you know, it's too much noise for people in residential areas that have got children, let's talk about it and discuss it and have honesty in a spirit of trusting one another, because if you can be honest with each other and talk about the problems and realize it's our city together, all of us, then you can begin to solve some of the problems. We did a similar thing in Manchester, where in Manchester it's called a nighttime ambassador, but Sasha Lord, who for many years he worked at the Hacienda, which some people may know, but then he's one of the big festival organizers and concert promoters. And again there, Manchester has some very particular issues, different to London, different to Glasgow, but around new buildings in particular, both commercial and residential. And what we found in Manchester is a very interesting point in case, because they have different problems. But one of the problems is that venues and live music venues and clubs and bars are being squeezed out because planning provision is actually creating things for big developments and moving them out. So again there we had to work out what the problems were and bring all the stakeholders together and address the issues. And that's happening in different cities across the UK. Now the reason why I said all of that and gave you as an introduction, and here you can see us at the mayor's, in the City Hall in London, where we have a nighttime commission, where we brought all the different people together to discuss and contribute, is that there are a number of different issues and lots of different people working in different areas. And I'm sure it's going to be the case in Vienna as well, that you have some people in licensing, some people in planning, the police deal with some issues, and then you have someone who takes care of housing, someone takes care of transport, and they're all in their own area. And often people are not talking about how 24-hour transport has an impact, and how the problem of high rents have an impact, and how the issue of residents and noise, and how you make a plan. And our key thing, and where we said that the agent of change was important, was in the context of an overall master plan. A master plan for the city, an urban master plan where all the different people in the outer areas and the inner areas all talking and communicating and working out a strategy to do what's best for the area. So does everyone know, could you put your hand up if you know what agent of change is? Okay, right, so that's really good to know, thank you. Right, so the agent of change principle is that whoever is the agent of change that's coming to an area, so if there are bars and clubs already in an area, and I come in and I want to put a block of flats, new commercial residences, I'm the agent of change because I'm bringing change to that area. And I have to be responsible. The principle is that whoever's the agent of change has to be responsible for sound insulation, noise attenuation, and taking care of their new premises. Because what was happening was that if you have a busy street with bars and clubs and everybody knows it, many people did not go to the area. We launched a place in London called the Old Truman Brewery in Brick Lane. For many years, not so many people were in East London. Then it became really popular, people moved in, and then suddenly people start complaining about the noise. And then often you'll get tickets or fines, and then people might say, well, actually you have to close down because of the noise. So the agent of change says if you come in and you put some flats there, you have to be responsible for soundproofing, for thick windows, maybe put the balconies on the back. Also let people know when they rent the place or they buy them that there is this place, the Ministry of Sound or whatever it may be, across the street. Do they understand that? So that then there's a recognition of that when they're there. It also is if you bring a factory. If you bring a factory to an area, or if you bring a nightclub to a quiet area. So if I bring a nightclub to a quiet area, I all has to be responsible for, as the agent of change that's coming to that area, for making sure there's minimum impact of noise. Now, where one of the, well, I'll tell you how it worked out, and then I'll tell you where the problems are. Two things happened. We got the Mayor of London put it in something called the London Plan. And every 5 years, there is a plan for London. The mayor is in charge of planning, but not overseeing licensing. Licensing is done by local councils. And there are 30 or so local councils in London. So we got it in the London Plan, which is really good. Fantastic news, because now it means that in London, if you have a place, the agent of change principle is there. So if there's new flats going in and you have a bar and you've been there 20 years and now suddenly, you know, and it's big, you spent 10 years making it popular and now it's going quite well. Now there's 3 new sets of flats next to you. Everyone was worrying, going, what are we going to do now because there'll be noise complaints? So that's good that that's there. There's a but. that's coming. But it also got put into the national planning policy framework, which is fantastic as well. So that's across the whole of the UK. And in England, they ratified it again. In each of the countries, they've got it in Scotland and Wales. So it's very good news. So in 2017 in London, 2018 nationally. We can talk about it more in the discussion because I'm not going to spend lots of time here. But it's great news that you have the agent of change. And it even helps when people are not inside the building. So you may have a building and you may soundproof it, but when people are out on the street, they make a noise there, which is often where the issues are, and they walk away. In Australia, we found that sometimes when people leave, if you have the agent of change principle, then often people may complain less anyway, even if people are making a noise in the street. But there's also an argument to be made about what kind of areas can be busy at night throughout the 24-hour cycle. I know for people who are in charge of policy, that's something for them to think about. When you have transport in Manhattan, you have 24 hours, you have big trucks going past. But if you want to be in an area where there's parks, where it's much quieter, how does that work? And how do we think about the overall urban planning model? The other issue that is not addressed with the agent of change is all of the other licensing issues that occur and that have been impacting the venue. So whilst it's a great achievement and it's very important, it's one part of a much bigger piece of regulation and conditions that affect live music venues, bars and nightclubs. A couple of other examples. We all did some work to help in New York. They now have a nighttime office and a nighttime officer, Ariel Palitz. They had enormous historic challenges like the cabaret licensing laws that were actually really racist laws originally and then were reused by Mayor Giuliani. Now that has been got rid of. So it's a great step forward. But again, there's some very big issues in New York. But it just goes to show that there are different good initiatives happening in places like Mumbai and even now in Sydney where they had the lockout laws. There's some important new changes happening. I think the thing I want to kind of finish up on is just to say that, whoops, there we go, is to say that when, for instance, in Britain, but there are examples everywhere, when we had the Olympics and everyone was out on the street, we really got to see who the public were. Often when we talk about nightlife, people talk about, they still have these old-fashioned ideas about crime, terrible things happen, violence, drugs. But actually, ordinary people generally are who we are. There are colleagues, there are family, there are friends, there are neighbors. It's us. And when policymakers sometimes think about these policies, they think about the people in the abstract. But actually, the people are us. And it was a great moment 7 years ago when we had the Olympics. Everyone out in the street, volunteering, contributing. And in a similar way, that's who the public are and who we should think about when we want to work together and when we make policy and who we're actually talking about and inviting people from around the world to come and enjoy our local areas, to participate, for new people to come and want to live there and come into these flats and apartments, and new businesses who want to set up there because we have these cool cultural areas, because we know those cool cultural areas with music venues are the ones that attract people from around the world to go there. I'd also make the point that we need to have 24-hour licenses as much as possible. Agent of change is very important, but the NTIA has campaigned to make sure, and in England we have 24-hour licensing, but they only often give us a license till 1 or 2 a.m. And in Hackney Council, which is one of the most successful ones, they recently did a kind of curfew where they said any new space would only be allowed to be open till 11 p.m. during the week and either midnight or 1 a.m. on the weekend. And you kind of think that's almost like the 1950s. It's like, what, you know, how can you compete with Berlin or Barcelona or anywhere with that kind of activity? So we're going to talk about it much more, but I think that's by way of introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Does this, hello? No? Okay, maybe. Thanks, Alan, for the introduction. I think we're going to start with a round of introductions, and then we're going to start with the discussion. In the end, there's going to be 10-15 minutes for Q&A and statements. And yeah, So my name is Lucas. I work for a company called Sound Diplomacy. We have offices in Berlin, London, Barcelona, and in the US. I'm working in the Berlin office, and we work with cities, we work with public institutions, and we help them to understand how public policy affects music scenes and cultural infrastructures. And we develop strategies for cities and public institutions to better support music and to better invest into infrastructure that supports the development of music scenes. Peter, do you want to continue with introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Peter. I'm the elected representative of the gastronomy in Vienna for the Chamber of Commerce. So I'm not an employee of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm a colleague, like a gastronomer, and gonna be elected. The election is every 5 years, and this is exactly what we have to deal with every day. You know, with noise, with complaints, with licensing. This is exactly what I do almost all day. All day.
Try the microphone. Is it? No, it doesn't work, right? No, I will try.
The room is small enough.
My name is Astrid. I work. I'm responsible for communications here at Book. So on behalf of all of us, I would like to warmly welcome you to this beautiful venue, which is also a cultural center, a rehearsal space, and many more things. And we've been around for almost 40 years.
I want to start with Astrid, and I think I can. Can everybody hear us? Yeah. I want to start with Astrid and Peter. In your opinion, what's the importance of supporting nighttime venues, both in terms of entertainment venues, performance venues, but also workspaces?
My task, or basically the task of the Chamber of Commerce, is twofold. One is the technical thing where we support getting licenses, doing some legal advice and all these things. And the other part is that we are working with the authorities, or actually with the lawmakers, in getting the right legal framework where we can operate our companies in. And these are the main two things we are busy with. Noise and actually smell, let's say, yeah, are the main two things where we have to deal with. Because we have a lot of problems like London has. We have to, for example, now we are facing the challenge of having a total smoking ban within the restaurants or clubs starting by November 1st, and we are actually pretty much scared of, not because of the smoke, but because of the noise outside. When the people have to go outside and smoke, it's gonna be loud. We have smoke. We will have smoke, and what's the result of that? We will have phone calls. So the police actually will have phone calls, claims. Police has to come, has to either shy the people away or bring them back into the restaurant. And by the end, they might be forced to close down the club, for example. And there we are trying hard to get some solutions, and we are working on that. But in regards to the upcoming elections by next Sunday, not one of the political parties is ready to move now or go into negotiations, because they will negotiate afterwards, you know, when they are trying to come up with to build the new government. So I'm positive, but I'm positive that we will come to a solution. But it's gonna be a change in the mindset of the neighbors and of the people living in Vienna. And what am I saying is, we are a big city, very big city, a metropolis, and actually being a metropolis, but we are not a recreational area. So we all have to think about that. We are all expecting to enjoy the infrastructure the big town is offering, but on the other hand, I want to have total silence. This will not work, you know. So we have to find a good way. But as I said, try also to change the mindset a little bit and say, okay, fine, it is a big city, but when I go out, there will be noise. That's it. And I love the agent of change concept, because this is what we don't have yet, but I think we should work on that.
Astrid, the importance of supporting, or of having music venues, or like workspaces in the evening or the night.
Well, yeah, the situation of Book is a very special one at the moment. The building we're in is 160 years old and it needs a lot of renovations in the coming decade. So generally we need all the support we can get. And obviously in a city like Vienna with a rich musical history, it's even more important to have all the stakeholders support the music business and nighttime economy.
So I think in the beginning we're going to talk more specifically about agent of change, about how it is implemented, what kind of value it can have for Vienna or for all of Austria, and then afterwards talk more generally about nighttime commissions supporting the nighttime activity. So Alan, you know that the implementation to the planning framework is quite recently. Can you already see changes? Or have, I know in Victoria they already quite soon afterwards announced of venues being safe to the agent of change. What are your kind of first results, or what are your expectations?
Yeah, there definitely have been some changes already, and if you, in a range of areas, in Hackney, I mentioned before, it's a very big borough, but where they have some factories and areas now, some of them new ones that have gone in for development. There are a lot of flats going in there. They've had to talk to some of the nightclubs about what they want to do in there and recognise it's there. You mentioned Victoria. So it definitely, and not just in London, I mean in Britain, it's now part of the framework. Again, it's really important to understand that the agent of change is one part that's important, but it was one part of many things that affect the decision making. So the local councillors in Britain, if you get a phone call or complaint, you may get one complaint or 3 complaints, or one person may keep complaining. Every time that complaint comes in, they legally have to respond to it. That's what you're saying. So you have to, yeah. Now, very rarely do people who love a place phone up the council and say, hey, I've had a great night, it was such a good place, let's have some more things like that. So we did a campaign, one of our Save Nightlife campaigns, is to have everybody who loves going somewhere to write to their local councillor and say, I think nighttime's really important, I had a great time at this place. So they get to hear that actually, because you only hear from the negatives, and they're legally, so you hear one person or 5 people complain, but if you get to hear 500 people or 1,000 or 10,000 people are all emailing you saying how great it is, those local councillors and people who get voted in, maybe by 500 people, maybe 1,000 people, all of a sudden they realise how many people actually really love these places. It has an effect, it has an impact. So I think that kind of engagement with people, and also, you know, people, young people, but people generally, culturally, they love the activity, and the more that you can have your voices heard in a constructive fashion, you give councillors and the people in the municipality some ammunition and understanding to say, you know, these are positives, not just negatives, because often people in a position of authority, they hear the negative side, the noise of the glasses clanging, or the refuse, or there's been an incident. They're not hearing the positive things, so I think those things are important. So the agent of change is important, but there's a range of other things in terms of licensing and regulation, and I think that, you know, in Vienna's case and in Germany and Austria, I think that if you look at examples like in Amsterdam and Berlin, but in other key cities as well, like Rio de Janeiro and Manhattan, there are so many examples of the fact that you can bring so many people, density, you can bring people from around the world, huge amounts of revenue, and I think using arguments about employment, revenue streams, about making the city a branded, it's already known internationally for culture, but just getting the people who make decisions to understand, turning the negative points that they see into the more positives. Young people are being employed in here, using this strategically and having representation. It's really important that any venues, and if you've got particularly festivals, venues, record labels, people who are promoters, you get together and you have your voices heard and create a kind of association or commission so that you can articulate that, because otherwise people, until you're organised, people don't pay as much attention to what you're saying.
I want to talk specifically about the alliances and the forming of alliances a bit later, because I think it's very important in driving this change. First, since the Agent of Change addresses noise issues, I wanted to talk to Peter and Astrid about their experience with noise. Because if you look, for example, at statistics from other cities, and you also said this, that a lot of the noise doesn't actually come from music venues directly, or doesn't come from sound systems directly. It comes from, often, I think in New York City, they did a study of 311 data between 2010 and 2015, and they categorized emergency calls, and the biggest source of noise complaints were actually parties indoors in residential buildings and not clubs. And then you take into account like trucks at night, you take into account people on the street, which is a huge issue also in terms of agent of change, you know, because if people leave the club, as far as I know, the agent of change doesn't work anymore. If the noise is from outside the club, the agent of change can't take effect anymore, because it only addresses the noises that come from inside the club. So from your perspective, like, what's your experience with noise in Vienna? What kind of, I mean, you said you have statistics on the noise complaints you get, what kind of sources they are, and do you happen to know if they come from new developments, specifically like newly developed buildings?
Now the point is that we are, as a business owner, you are very strictly limited. Yeah, and if you have a complaint, you're really getting into trouble all the time. But as you just said, but if you celebrate a private party, or if you do it in a private environment, then okay, the police might come and then they go away, and that's it. But for example, we have a very interesting situation. I don't know if it's just in Vienna, but since I live here, I know about this situation here. For example, if you have a Schanikarten, yeah, and you wanna apply. Pardon?
Terrace garden.
Terrace garden. Thank you. And if you so you then know what a Schanikarten is. Terrace garden. And you apply for a permit. Of course, the chuckload of people giving their comments and saying, okay, this is fine, this is not so fine, we have to do it this way or the other way. And then when it comes to noise, then they are pretty much strictly limited, because we have 3 steps. We have the day noise limit, and the evening noise limit, and the night noise limit. And the night noise starts at 10 p.m. Okay, so of course you go from there. So when you apply for, let's say, for a terrace garden for, let's say, 40 people, then during the permission process, you know that one person statistically creates such an amount of certain amount of noise times 40, and this is where we check, where you then finally check if you reach the limit or not. Okay, and let's say between 10 and 11 p.m. because the terrace gardens are allowed to be open mostly until 11 at night. Yeah, we say okay, fine. Up to 10 p.m. it's fine with 40 persons, but between 10 and 11 it's too loud. So you have to cut down your space for about, let's say, 5 people or 10 people. It depends when at a certain moment you reach the limit, then it's fine. But when you come up with the argument, okay, that's great, but there's a tram every 2 minutes passing by, and this makes a noise, you won't even hear all the people in the terrace garden because it's so noisy, then the reaction is, this is a temporary event. It won't be counted in. I mean, this is a very crazy situation, you know, because even when you're located on a main street and the cars are going back and forth and the trams are going back and forth in the public transportation, you are limited to a certain level of people creating noise, because all these things are, for example, as I just said, a single, counted as a single event. This is just an example with challenges, the kind of challenges we are facing. We have to deal with.
In terms of like a venue, Astrid, what's your experience with noise complaints?
So the book, just for some context, the book has about 200,000 visitors annually, and we have more than 100 music events alone, not counting all the other events that take place at book per year. But we have very good soundproofing, so obviously it's the same as in most cases. We don't get complaints from the sound systems. But we do have a inner courtyard. So the book is a whole building block, and there's a yard in the middle, and people go outside to smoke, or just after some concerts to sit. And usually it's not a problem, but sometimes we do get complaints. We have balconies and lofts all around, and usually people come here who live in this area are very proud to live close to Hook. It's kind of a landmark that sometimes goes in ads on Wilhaven or other places. They are proud, so they advertise the apartment and say it's close to Hook in some cases, and in some cases we get complaints. But it happens very rarely.
And how do you, when you get complaints, is there a system for like looking to, having a conversation with the neighbor? Is there support from the city to mitigate between the neighbors and kind of the noise, like the venue?
Well, as far as I know, it's often the case that the same people complain. It's not really different people, but mostly the same people. And when we have big events, we try to get in touch with our neighbors beforehand. So we have this big public viewing of the World Cups or European Championships every 2 years, and so there's a lot of noise in the yard. It takes place outside. So we give our contact details to all the neighbors and try to ask them to contact us first before contacting the police.
Can I just ask, how many people here are promoters or have a venue or something like that here? Okay, good, yeah, good. Because that's a really important thing if you're a venue, but also if you want to represent, to have a clear relationship with the neighbours and the residents, and to make sure you talk to them as much as possible. And so there's an understanding. Like, our mantra is to talk to everyone, like I said at the start. So with the police and the councillors and everyone, particularly if you don't agree, let's get everyone together. But the residents is really important. And as a venue, you can do a really good job. In the daytime, you can host things, you can get them in to understand, let them know the manager, give them a number to call if they have a concern. You want to be really proactive with the residents, because we're all part of the same community. That street is our street, and when they realise that you help create jobs there, you actually stop crime, that your positive contribution in terms of the brand, the area, people say, oh, you're in that area and it's got that really cool place. So that doesn't always seem problematic to them. The other thing that's worth doing is you can get sound, your point I think is really important about how you distinguish between different kinds of sound, between what we call acoustic background sound that's constantly there, and very specific decibel sounds, or the sound of people talking and leaving. And it's annoying, but to begin with, venues can do a really good job of taking the noise decibel levels at different times of the day, at different distances, all around their venue. I know it sounds crazy because you're there, I want to curate and put on an event, but you have to be proactive. And the more that you can take sound levels at different times of the day and night and provide the local councillors and the municipality with evidence and residents, so you know what you're talking about, you already put, information is what changes a lot of this as well. You win hearts and minds by some of these stats, and you say, look, as it happens, it might be a temporary event, but this is when every day of the week the main noise is. These are the issues. And then just simple things like when people leave, give them, these are very easy things to do, give them lollipops, give signs, engage and say, can you not, because a lot of it is the loud noise when they're leaving and walking away. And just doing some things that engage with people and remind them all the time about the neighbours and everything, so that you're being proactive and you're listening and responding.
I think before we look into other kind of licensing and regulations approaches, it would be interesting to hear your perspective, because you said that the Agent of Change, it took a lot of alliances, it took a lot of people on board, from the police to developers to the different boroughs, and that was really important. And I think in Vienna, if you say like, the music venue trust is plays such an important role, and in Vienna maybe these such institutional associations don't exist. when implementing the agent of change, what were the key success factors and which parties were the most important to have on board?
Well, the thing I would say is all these things were just made up and created 5 years ago. Mark decided to create the Music Venues Trust because he had problems, him and Beverly. A few of us decided to create the Nighttime Industry Association because we were like, what's going on? And you guys can do exactly the same thing, right? It's about a few people getting together, being prepared to commit your time and talking to people and get organised and get represented. It's remarkable how much politicians listen to you if you have got together a few different groups and you represent as an association. And then you can publish stuff, you can write things in publications and do all of that. The thing is that lobbying, there's a few key things that are important. Most people who are in power, if you give them a sheet with information and a document they love stats, right? If you say, look, this is what this is how much that is, these amount of jobs are created, these amounts of revenue, these amount of people visit us, and you give them, and then you're giving them something to argue with and understand. It can't just be an emotional argument. It's not fair, it's not nice, we don't like it. That isn't. So you have to have, and really you have to organise. You have to come up and start providing some stats and information, and then you have to understand from a lobbying point of view who the key people are to talk to get round the table. But also maintain your relationship. The golden, it's not a secret, but the golden relationship is on the one hand being diplomatic with the people that are in power, but you have a relationship with particularly young people, but a lot of people, the public, who love these places. They don't want to see them close. And it's important you can harness that relationship as well. Because you have to remember that people in positions of power are always thinking about the next election. You have another one coming up here soon. And then you have very soon. And then you have, the national one, and then you have the one for Vienna. Everyone you're talking to in position of making decisions are also thinking about who's going to be voting for the next time, what they can say on their record. Are more people going to complain about noise, or are more people going to vote for them because they've done good things culturally? If you can make a compelling argument and demonstrate, and we managed to get, this is the thing about getting people involved in campaigning and online and using mechanisms to send information to people. The more you can do that, and the more people start hearing nighttime economy, okay, I like revenue, cultural value, rather than crime, drugs, terror, the old narrative. The more they hear that and they understand it, it becomes part of, you have to turn it slowly, keep tweaking, keep pushing, keep educating, keep showing, keep discussing. The more you can do that, the more you're in a position to then get them to become the champions of actually doing these things themselves.
Astrid, in terms of kind of, the associations or your relationship with the city or with governing bodies in Vienna, are you part of a venue association? Is there something like a venue association? Or what's your relationship with the city and the kind of regulating departments of the NR?
So we are part of an international organization of venues. It's called TEH, Trans-European. It's a European-wide association. We meet twice a year in different cities in Europe. So that's a nice exchange of ideas and stuff. In Vienna, obviously we're in contact with other venues, but there's not a specific yes. But our relationship with the city is, I would say, quite good. Although obviously we have discrepancies and we're not on the same page about everything, but we're working closely together with the city, especially in this situation now that we have to renovate the building. So we feel like the city really appreciates the value the group gives to the city. We feel like that's a common it's an agreement between everyone, every party that's in power at the moment, at least. The FPÖ is not a big fan of book, obviously. But currently the relationship
do you get any support from the city in terms of, you said you already have like noise insulation. Is there any support from venues, or promotional education support that you get?
Of course, but it's so usually we get funded for different kinds of program areas. So we have performing arts, children's culture, art gallery. So it's not just music events. And for the recent funding campaign we did, the city paid about half of the renovation costs.
There was also like noise and just general renovation.
No. It was emergency lighting.
Okay.
Mostly.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, it's probably a huge cost.
Yes, 850,000 euros.
Yeah, I mean, as a cultural space, you don't operate in the same area as a commercial or real estate or residential real estate. So it's important to have the support systems. Peter, in terms of the different, like getting all the right people on board to support nighttime culture, nighttime economy, do you feel like there's an understanding in the city of Vienna across all the departments, from police, from planning, licensing? Do you feel like there's an understanding that this is something that should be supported?
Definitely yes, there is an understanding, and I really admire the men and women who are active in licensing all these business, because they're always between two chairs. Here's the business owner who wants to get a permit, and now he's paying and saying, okay, I want to have this permit, but I have to do this or that, or follow these rules or regulations. And then on the other side, there are the neighbors who are calling in and saying, hey, it's too loud, it's too noisy. We don't want to have this club venue here in our neighborhood, and they're right in the middle. And then in the end, they have to issue the license or the permit. And 2 minutes later, the attorney is calling in, hired by a group of neighbors, and giving them a hard time. But there's an understanding. I really admire these people. They're patient. They're trying to do their best, and then I think we are in good terms with them. I think it's more, when I'm glad to say, you are perfectly right with the upcoming elections, the same year, because it's kind of, most of the working people spend most of their life, before they get retired, in their business. And they drive home for sleeping, for spending some weekends, but most of the time they are spent in their business. And in a certain district where the business is located, they are not allowed to vote. So they are always second, because when we are coming together as business owners from a certain district and saying, okay, we are 2,000 businesses here in this district, and we are allowed to vote and give their vote for you, and for the head of the current city council, for example. That would make a difference in terms of, okay, just the people who live there are allowed to vote. So, as you just said, they're always thinking about the next election. And what we are having probably it's in every city. I dare to say that each single business, in terms of gastronomy or clubs or whatever, what I'm trying to say, I dare to say that each single one has its one and only famous neighbor who is complaining. And that's you see, this is kind of out of balance, because when we get a claim, or actually the police gets a claim, and it's always the same, I say, this guy should be ignored. But this doesn't happen. When 10% of the neighbors are calling in and saying it's too loud, and we have to do something, that's fine. It's also fine with me, even though I'm on the other side of the street, or of the table actually. But if just one calling in, hello, I mean, this is too much, But the argument is the health issue. There's a potential health issue, and if you feel that it's too loud, you might get sick, and so on and so on and so on. And this is enough for the authorities to say, okay, no, fine.
No, stop. That's not true. They have to prove it. They have to prove it before closing down.
The proof is from a doctor?
No, the authority have to prove it. It's really too loud before closing down. They can't just do it because one person or two persons or 10% complain.
Oh well, it just happened at the terrace in the first district because the lady had a friendship with one of the government people, and so the whole bar had to close down because of one lady.
This story is not quite true because also not only residents have lawyers or PR agents, sometimes also gastronomers have PR agents. It was more than one person. The government has been there 3 or 4 times checking the noise level, and it was really more than one person. Because the administration wouldn't risk to close down the business on nothing, on no proof.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes enough that your closing hours change from 4 o'clock to 2 o'clock, or from 2 o'clock to 12. I mean, if you are a nightclub and you have to close at 11,
they do not do this without proof.
No, but the health issue is not on changing the closings. It's closing the whole place down. But closing the
health issue is upon noise and night rest. Sorry, I am politician. I'm from the first district, and I know the part of the residents because they come to me, and I very often have Peter Dobcak and me. We know sometimes the same restaurants and other places from different sides. So I miss in this whole discussion. There are people living there. They could be your grandparents. Imagine your grandparents living in a house, and in the house next door, some young person starts a night business, and this flourishes. And during the, there is traffic, of course, but there also is traffic in waves, and during the night, Vienna is pretty silent. Whereas terrace gardens keep the level till midnight in summer. You kept this.
So I think
you kept this, and the summer months is more than half the time they are open.
So I think this is really important, and it's exactly what I'm talking about, and why we need to make sure we have dialogue. The first thing I'd say in this room, you already have the foundation for an association or a pre-commission. The people that put their hands up should have a think about the fact that nothing will change if you don't do it. That's how the change happens, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, you're absolutely right. I know myself, like for instance, for a while my son was living in Nashville, and I used to go, and sometimes I stayed in the hotel there, and every time I stayed in the hotels, they'd put me next to the elevator, and people would be coming at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I love nightlife, right? But my son was like 6, I'd be like, coming out, what are you doing, guys? Can you please be considerate? And that's why we need to have, and I tried to make the point at the start, but a really good urban master plan. And in some areas where you want to meditate and relax and chill, in the daytime as well as the evening, there are parks. You have to think about how we create areas and zones where they can have some activity here and some activity there. And nobody likes to have, if they have their window there and they're sleeping with children or old or whoever it is, they don't have boom, boom, boom there. But equally, we got some people who were in their 80s and 90s, some of them were very well-known actors and writers, and they would say, we're in bed, but we recognize the importance of this culturally. And so what we have to do is we have to understand where there are areas where there needs to be curated quiet, as well as, though, there needs to be, I think, in an international, global, grown-up city, 24-hour areas, where people who come in to live there, they understand this is going on, they're part of that, and they know when they come in, it has the frisson and the dynamism of a city that's exciting. And we have to make out a strategy so that all of these different areas can work together, so that when these complaints are made, there's an understanding and there's a joint, and we all, it's not the enemy, right? This whole thing about it's those, we're all living in this city together, different generations, we all, no, I've never really met a politician or a councillor or a police person that says, I hate the city, I want it to do really badly. I've not met residents and I've not met any people who run clubs or venues or DJs that say, I hate the city, I really want to make a lot of noise, I want there to be crime. We all have a common goal, right? We have a common purpose. So we have to make out a strategy to work together and solve it together.
I think in terms of... I was going to go to talk about 24-hour licenses, but...
No, I have a general question about this agents of change concept, which is, I don't know, I think that agent of change should not be just the person or the company that does a change and he or she or it has to be responsible for the implication and the outcomes of that change. I think that the goal should be, in my opinion, to bring the municipality, the council, the government to be part of this change, so be an agent as well. Because, for example, I don't like, and I think anybody here, as a promoter or as a restaurant, whatever it is, doesn't like the fact that the city council or the government is coming to you and saying we're going to be more restrictive about soundproofing and the decibel limits and so on. Yeah. And at the same time, it's on you to be up to that level. We're not helping you in doing so, and that's simply unacceptable.
But I think that's what.
So what do you think about that?
I think that's what Alan was referring to when we were talking about, just the agent of change is not going to solve the problem, but it really needs a much more holistic approach. And I think
it's a starting point.
Yeah, it's a starting point. But I mean, for example, when you look at Berlin, when you look at Victoria, they have funds for noise insulation that are funded by the city. When you look at San Francisco, the San Francisco Entertainment Commission, they exactly what they do is they are this position between the venue owners and between the city, and they, for example, for the agent of change, I don't know how it's going to be in London, but when there's a new planning application for a new development, they need to do public hearings. So that automatically includes all the residents, it includes the politicians in the city, and it includes the venue owner. And I agree with you, it's just one of the many things that need to be done. And in terms of, I think in terms of supporting venues, it's not just the agent of change, it's just...
I know, the point is that you have to find compromise. I mean, in my opinion, and in the opinion of some friends of mine, people that I know of, they're also working on nighttime economy, either DJs, producers, or promoters, whatever. For us, it's very frustrating the fact that we love the music and the culture, but at the same time we realize that our job is not is to find compromise with people, so partners in the talk, who are absolutely not interested in what we're doing. So that's a very big handicap. So we need to make them first calm and understand what we're doing, the value of what we're doing, because there's basically, in the view of most of the people, there's no value in what we're doing. It's just noise, drugs, complaints, dangers, whatever it is. And this is the biggest problem.
So I think that's a really good example of what I was saying. And remember, don't look outside this room if you want to see any change. There's no point complaining about other people. It's like anything in the world that's ever been done, it's when people decided to do something about it. And what you'll find is all these people that are not listening, quite soon they start listening, but it takes work. You have to make the argument about why it's important culturally, economically, but you're lucky. You've got a big head start because you can draw examples from Berlin and Amsterdam and London and New York, Chicago and San Francisco. A lot of people have done this very thing you're talking about already. You get pictures, you get stats, you demonstrate the point about culture, about revenue, and it doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes you create a nighttime commission with all the people and you sit there and it's really good. And then what happens is you find yourself sitting next to the same police guy that's shutting down Fabric nightclub, the biggest nightclub in London, which is one of the most important clubs. And you have to work together, even though you really disagree on that. And you have to say, you know what, we're moving forwards and now we're moving back, because if someone died in their flat or on the underground or outside the police station, none of those places are being closed down, yet you're closing down a nightclub I really disagree with you, but we've got these bigger problems to solve, and we're not children. We're going to have to talk them through, because it's our city, it's our area, and we're going to have to win each other in a democracy. I'm going to have to convince you, I'm going to get other people, and we're going to try and win. And I'll give you one other example, right, because there's one borough out of the 30 in London called Hackney. Now, 25 years ago, I'm sure many of you have been there, Shoreditch and Hackney, but 25 years ago, Hackney was really run down, lots of crime, can be scary in some areas, but because of what people like you did there, DJs and young people putting on like events, live music things, then more fashion comes and retail, and all of a sudden the biggest advertising agencies in the world are there, and it's growing, everyone's really excited. And then the council, who 10 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, they had a strap line, which was that everybody come to Shoreditch. They really wanted people to come to Hackney, right? But then they decided, oh, it's too noisy, too much problems, too much refuse, too much. They just decided this, right? So we went to speak with them. We said, what are you guys doing? How comes it? They said, well, everyone's had enough. Too much noise. Too much. We said, who? They made it up in their minds, right? So we basically said, fine, you know what we're going to do? We're going to speak to everyone in Hackney. And within 3 or 4 weeks, we got about 5,000 people to respond to things they usually get like 30 responses to. And we had a campaign, we wrote to the national newspapers, and we made people pay attention, right? And we had a victory to begin with. And 2 years down the line, they fought it back again, they had a lot of money, and they basically then imposed, so we won, and we got them to move back, and we carried on, and everyone was supporting, we were like cheering, and now again, they've done it again, right? And what I'm saying is, it's like life. You have to keep struggling, you have to keep working, you have to commit to this idea, you have to convince people of what it is. You can't just complain, you have to win hearts and minds, and you have to get people to collaborate on the journey and go along with you.
Yes, but we also have to remember that there's one thing about the city is that, which is more difficult. There's our big heritage invest that Ms. Exner talked about, going off, which is basically classical music, and we actually have a mayor who says that Vienna is just fine with classical music. Who cares about electronic music and whatever? But I mean, it's not a complaint. It's just that really the core, let's say, of this agent of change idea is that the one who makes changes is responsible for the outcome, which is, to me, dangerous, because if something happens, like it happened in fabric a couple of times, any kind of accident, somebody dies because of an overdose, or anything else, something like this, then the council or the local government is going to go and point at the owners or the managers of that venue, because agent of change.
It's not really agent of change.
It's completely independent.
That's a different thing. That's a licensing thing. And we make the point that venues, that in English law, you are responsible for your conduct. So if someone gets up and punches someone, I cannot say this is the venue. It was the conduct of the person, and we bring lawyers in to make sure, and we do bring lawyers in as well. We bring lawyers to say, it's English law, you're responsible for your conduct. The venue did not punch you. And it's really important that people take responsibility as well. If they take 25 pills and they keel over, that's their responsibility. It's not the nightclub hasn't put the pills in their mouth, right? Individuals have to take responsibility as well.
I'm not saying that the concept. Yeah. I'm not saying that the concept and your work has to do with this, but I know for experience that this has happened in different countries.
It's just an independent, like the issue is independent of the agent of change. So I think agent of change is one thing, and then this is like another problem that you need to address differently. I think we can talk about it afterwards. I would open the questions to other people.
Yes.
So we've been talking about the agent of change from a more macro perspective, what I see right now. So we try to improve the situation within institutions, within maybe the infrastructure, improving soundproofing. But as I see it, we have mostly problems because of the noise which is made by individuals or groups of people. So the guests who go to these locations, to these venues, to these events, right? Other approaches to change behavior, to change the behavior of when leaving the location, the venue, not to make noise, to maybe bring them, or maybe, I don't know, bring the noise to a different place just by social nudging, I would say, which is also very, interesting, an interesting concept. I don't know whether everyone has heard about social nudging. An extreme example would be, for instance, in China, you can see via WeChat who in your surroundings is owing money to the state, for instance. And then you are motivated to go to that person and motivate him, hey, pay it back. So this is a very, very extreme example, but I think, like, I don't know whether there's something like this, an approach like this, but somehow doing some positive reinforcement in the behavior of the people, this might be also a very interesting solution approach. And we could also maybe bring in the clubs, politicians as well, and say, hey guys, take this money, invest it into a kind of a system, into a kind of gamification approach, and you can save this amount of money of complaints that you have to deal with, also of all the executives, the police that has to go out and you have to pay them as well, right? And the complaints as well, and so you will save that much money with investing this money into such a system or into such a solution. I don't know whether there's something like that, but
I mean, on that point, I think that the person at the back made the point that it's a city, and I think that you need to make a compelling argument that in some parts of the city there should be 24-hour activity because it's what's needed in a grown-up, civilized city. And you have to win that argument and not nudge people. I really dislike nudging because it's slightly dishonest, I think. I think you don't end up winning people to the actual point, but that's just my view. Obviously, you can try different mechanisms, but you have to have an honest, open discussion with policymakers and with everyone. And you know, the thing about policymakers, just to say, not to sound too controversial, right, but they represent the people. And if the people have decided that they want to see some things differently done, then you have to make them understand that and get that point across and do it that way. And I think the kind of city that you want to live in, it wasn't just a throwaway point. The kind of city that we want to create, the area we want to live in, the kind of country we want to be, why this is in, when people go to China to represent Austria or to represent Britain, they talk about art and they talk about science, biomedicine. Now, we want them to come and talk about our contemporary music, our street food. We want them to talk about the kind of cultural backdrop that we've created that is important to generate. It's the 5th biggest industry in Britain, 70 billion a year. This is not some silly little thing that we do around the back of the bike sheds. We'll make people really understand that, and that's a central part of employing people and revenue as well as culture.
But for instance, so like an idea that I had is, for instance, an option would be, hey guys, I don't know how we can control this or measure it, but if you are not allowed when leaving this location up to 500 feet in surroundings, if you can really keep calm until then, you get, I don't know, 10% discount on your next visit of this club, or the first beer free, or something like that. You know, so this direction.
I think it's a very. I don't expect any of our democracies to go into heavy surveillance anytime soon. And
I mean, we have 24-hour surveillance here, right?
Yeah, but from my perspective, it doesn't represent like a policy approach to solving these issues. So I think it's. I mean, maybe I don't know the answer. Maybe you should try it.
I know.
I don't know if this works, but I think in terms of, I think what's an interesting example is Amsterdam. And one thing that I wanted to ask you, I mean, we're kind of running out of time, but I think looking at extending opening hours and maybe even making them 24 hours in certain areas could be an interesting way, because a lot of the issues arise because people leave at the same time, people leave in big groups. I mean, in Vienna, it's maybe not the issue that there's no public transport at 6 in the morning, but I know that Vienna has been trying for a long time with a lot of different initiatives to extend opening hours. A lot of clubs have struggled with it, and I think for Vienna it could be an interesting approach to look at areas and say, like, you know, why don't we develop 24-hour licenses? And in Amsterdam, they also had in one of the main squares where there was a lot of traffic, they did several measures like having signs on the street, and they had kind of safety patrols, in a way, noise safety patrols, that also were targeted towards impacting sexual harassment on the street, but mostly noise, looking at, you know, making people aware, like, please be quiet, there are signs, I'm telling people to be quiet. And I think it reduced both the crime rate and the noise complaint rate by over, like, around 30 or 40%. So I think there are ways from a city perspective to do it. It's just the question whether the city of Vienna, for example, is interested in looking. I don't know what your opinion about 24-hour licenses is.
Yes. Of course, I'm positive in regards to 24-hour licenses, but the point is that the pub owner or the restaurant owner isn't forced to keep his location open 24 hours. It's just a certain flexibility which might spread, and this was the idea with the club lounge license. They have the permit to keep the club lounge open until 6 o'clock in the morning, where the noise of the city is elevating a little bit more again, and so it's not so disturbing when the guests are leaving the location. But it might spread the noises a little bit, you know, when you're. But what I wanted to say, again, because I'm sorry I have to leave then, is when we think about the very inner city in terms of the area of the battle iron, means Lübeck, Sonnenfelsgasse, and the surroundings there. We had a lot of complaints there, and the owner of the battle iron has to reinvent itself with a certain app reservation system, which works fine as far as I know, to keep the noise level down. But at the end, everybody's forgetting that especially this area and some other areas of the inner city are areas where people go out for 400, 500, 600 years, you know? And it's typically, it's the sogenannte ortsübliche Lärm. Yeah.
And they had small at that time, you know, so there wasn't so many places.
Yeah, but
besides this area, so
but you know, what I'm trying to say is that we also could bring in this argument, saying, hey, in this area people are going out since Mozart or even earlier, you know. So, and when you move there and you have an apartment there, you have to live with it. That's it. You know, I know you don't like it.
In the first district there are so many tourists, and tourists also fill up the day, and they will also keep going there in the night time. So if you want to have the tourists and you want to have the quiet, it's not going to be possible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I would like to add one point on which the two of us would agree, I think, because I think the most important point for night industries is, before signing a rental agreement, check the environment. Check, is this a residential area? What kind of people live here? Also, check the quality of the house you want to go there. Vienna is full of old houses. You can try to do some noise cancelling measures.
You won't get the permissions.
You can try to do noise things within the rooms, but there will always be a chimney, and you have the bathroom in the last floor. So this is check it out beforehand before you sign a contract. I think this is the most important thing, and then you will have much less troubles with people.
I think we have to cut the discussion now, but I think one point.
Yes, ma'am.
But I think one point of view is also that clubs most of the time don't decide to go into residential areas, and then you have the clubs that are not really in a residential area. Then there comes to gentrification because those clubs make the area hip, and then come all the residentials because they want to live there, and then they, at one point they get kids and family, and then it's not so nice anymore.
but I think we...
Can I say one thing? Anyone who's in the room now who cares about this, and I could probably point at them because I've seen some of your expressions, should go and see Martina, stay and decide to get an association together and to start organising yourselves. I absolutely believe if you want to see the change, that's the first step. And listen to what other people have said that you don't agree with, because you need to understand the people you do not agree with the most, and to make your argument so that they can be convinced of it.
And collect data.
No, really.
Collect data for making your point.
Es gibt die Lerndaten.
Yeah.
Die sind abrufbar online.
Thanks everybody for listening.